Dear Mother, welcome to Sana Mama, a space to honour the unspoken truths of mothering, where birth and death, joy and heartbreak intertwine. Here we hold space for the stories we don't always share, beyond the polished ideals and into the raw and real, through the tender spaces of loss, life, and everything in between. For the mothers who carry their children in their arms, and for those who carry them in their hearts, Sana Mama is a place to explore the infinite ways mothering shapes and reshapes us. May we grieve, connect, and celebrate together, to embrace the messy, beautiful truth of this journey, and to remind one another that none of it has to be carried alone. This is Sana Mama, a letter to all mothers. In this episode of Sana Mama, Bianca will be sharing her journey with stillbirth and her stay in the NICU. If this episode may be triggering to you, I would recommend to save it for a later date. And if you're enjoying this podcast, then please subscribe and leave us a review, as it will help us raise awareness for this very important topic. Hi Bianca, thanks for coming on to the Sana Mama podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's a real privilege to have you and an honour for you to be so open and willing to share your story with us and with the world. So I'd love you to tell me a little bit about yourself and your experience into motherhood and becoming a mother.
Yeah, well, it's been a really big journey for me. I think I've always, I had this ideal when I was young that I wanted like 5 kids and big family, and, I didn't really have that growing up. So I guess I kind of had this ideal. We fell pregnant with our first in 2016. And that was my ideal kind of situation. Like I was 26 years old and, I went completely natural and, I didn't even paint my nails, and I was like a yoga teacher at the time. And it was just like this very, like I wanted to do like a home birth or at least like a water birth. And I just had this, I guess now I kind of look at it like quite a naive perspective on what I thought the transition to motherhood was. And I actually, I did a lot of reading in my first pregnancy, and at around like 30 weeks mark, I was like reading a book by Ina May Gasking, and she's considered a spiritual midwife, and she kind of writes these like really profound stories on how to like birth freely. And I remember finishing the book, and at the last like story, it was about stillbirth. And I had this moment being like, oh, closed book, like don't bring that energy in. That's not something that would happen in this day and age or would happen to me now. And then I think like when I look back at it now, like I had a lot of strong intuition that I wasn't able to recognize. So from about 20 weeks in my first pregnancy, something felt funky. Like it just didn't feel like energetically connected. And, I am a yoga teacher, and I have like a meditation practice, and I dive into all of that kind of, I guess, therapies. So I felt like I was ignoring something. I wasn't listening. I had a midwife that would come to my house, and I asked her several times, like something doesn't feel right. It got to about, 33 weeks, and I was still kind of saying, are the movements meant to be like this? I'm not too sure what's happening. And it was like always some sort of, not excuse, but some sort of like reason, like, oh, you're a first-time mum, or as long as there's some movement, every baby has their own movement, and, kind of all this stuff. And then it got to like about 35 weeks, and I remember my dog woke me up at 3 a.m. in the morning, and he was like on the bed crying. And I sat up, and I had this thought being like, oh, what if the baby just died? And it was like, oh, shut that thought out, Bianca, don't think like that. And then the next day, I just kind of went like a normal day, and then I just felt very like my whole body was like honing in, like something's taking place, be aware, be aware. And I went to, like, I called because I was in the midwifery group. So you kind of like choose, you got about three kind of home birth midwives. And on that day, it was like my sub in midwife. So I haven't met her yet. And she was like, oh, look, just come in and do a scan. And at that point, I was like, oh, that's really weird. Like, my last midwife hasn't said to do that once, like a scan. And this is kind of freaky. And sure enough, like, we went in and I was very silent. It's like I just knew. And she was doing the scan, and she happened to be a student midwife. So she was still, like, it was her first year in. So she was still kind of like fumbling. And obviously, she couldn't find the heartbeat. And then it was this, okay, well, now we're going to this very sterile room and we've got these like doctors, and everyone's silent. And then the doctor kind of just turned around and was like, I'm so sorry, your baby doesn't have a heartbeat. Um, from that moment, it was obviously quite intense. Like, you just kind of, your first question is, well, what does that mean? Like, okay, they don't have a heartbeat. So do we take the baby out and start the heart, or do we do it while I'm in the womb, or is it going to just start again? Um, and a couple of hours later, we got more ultrasounds to see if they could see why the baby died. And in that moment, we found out we're having a little girl. So we didn't know their gender. I went through, so this is 2016, and I went through quite a traumatizing birth, as birthing your unborn child kind of is. And we got to spend like a good, I think, 4 days with her. And yeah, so immediately after the birth, we were allowed to spend, like, I was in hospital for 4 days. So the birth took 19 hours. For some reason, I didn't know about breaking waters or things like that. I planned to just like dive into a full like natural birth. So I was trusting, I was like, yeah, women have been doing this for centuries, like, it's fine. So they gave me some medication to cause contractions. But what it did is that it caused one massive constant contraction, and then I couldn't get on top of the pain because there was no risk to the baby. At that time, I was the very last person to see the anaesthetist for an epidural. So they were able to just let me be in pain, knowing that, the baby's already passed away. So nothing's gonna kind of go wrong for her. Yeah, it was horrendous. So that really long labor, and I think I ended up passing out from like exhaustion when she was crowning. So that she was sitting on my bladder, and then I had these like bladder complications for 4 months afterwards. But because of all the bladder issues, I was able to spend 4 days with her in the hospital in her body.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, and what was your daughter's name?
Her name was Luna.
Luna.
Yeah. So her name was actually going to be Lotus. And I still love the girl's name, Lotus, but we went with Luna because it was kind of like this always with us, out of reach, symbolicness to the moon. I tracked a lot of like how many months pregnant I was with the moon. So I was kind of, it felt more fitting for her to have that kind of reflective nature as opposed to like a blooming flower.
Yeah, looks
Yeah.
beautiful. So so I'm assuming, so obviously they induced your labor so that you would birth Luna, and she was stillborn. And after they discovered that you had the bladder complications, they were like, okay, well, you can stay in the hospital. Was there any need for them to call in to do an autopsy or anything with Luna, or they were just kind of...
Yes. So it's something that you got the choice whether or not to do.
Yeah.
And I think like, it's a tough question, like, when someone asks that of you, because it's like, oh, do I want someone doing that, or do I just trust, but I think my trust is kind of broken. So, and I wanted to know what if I did anything wrong, really. So we did opt for an autopsy, which they didn't do until we checked out of hospital.
Yeah.
The time that I did spend with her, back then, they didn't have something what they call cold cots now.
Yeah.
So it was quite like, I look back on it now, like the amount of like PTSD, and it's so easily seen where it kind of stems from in those like few moments of like having her body, and then every night the nurses would put her body in the fridge, and then when she would come out, the skin of her, and she starts changing. She doesn't look like even the way she was when she first came out of my womb. But you're so like, the fog of grief is just the most in, like, you just don't want to be there on every level. So everything becomes like so mundane and so like clouded. It's
Yeah.
like you don't know what you're doing, you don't even know who you are. And so we did opt for the autopsy once we left, to which that came back unexplained. So they didn't find anything wrong. So then we went down along with the path of grief. I kind of sat in this place of like, she was maybe the spiritual being, and she had to come through my body as like a vessel to clear so she could go do really good work on a spirit level. I told myself all the things that I could think of to kind of soften the edges of the spiky grief. And that's where I kind of sat with. When we went back for our autopsy results and, how do we go again, the maternal fetal medicine kind of said to us, like, the chances of that happening again, if it's unexplained, is like pretty much none. It's just not heard of. It's like he said, it's like getting struck by lightning twice in 1 week.
Yeah, I'm always really curious about this now, obviously because of our own journey, and yeah, with a doctor being so certain with a result like that, and you're just like, okay, and then that kind of brings that trust back on, where you're like, oh, okay, like this is probably a safe place for us to start trying again, and we can know that moving ahead we're not going to have any further issues. Did that give you that kind of safety?
Absolutely. And it did, until it didn't. So I then had, I think, 3 miscarriages in a row, very early. And at that point, it wasn't like, losing Luna was like huge. Like, it was like, you lose so much more than just the child itself. You lose the schools and the birthdays, and you lose the moments, you lose the color of the hair, or if the first haircut. It just goes on. So when I had this kind of recurrent miscarriages, these very early miscarriages, it didn't feel like I lost a person. Like, it felt like there was something not right with my body. And that was kind of a little bit disheartening. But sure enough, like, pretty soon, if you think about it, 6 months postpartum, I was pregnant with our second child. And I went into this pregnancy the complete opposite to Luna. I was like, okay, I don't want a natural birth. I want every single doctor on board. I want to know absolutely all the tests. I want to know all the medical jargon. I only want people in the room with white coats that have done at least a minimum of 5 years study on this stuff. I went into it a different way. I wanted all the scans and all the tests weekly because I was highly like anxiety riddled. So we did find out the gender, and we're having a little boy. We got to our 20-week scan again, and he was a lot more different with movement. He was super busy. So that was great for me. I had that really good reassuring. And then it got to about 30 weeks, and I still had those thoughts like, oh, something doesn't feel right. I still was having those thoughts, and I was like, okay, well, there's a reason why I'm feeling this, because of my past history. I put it down to that. And then, I changed up my whole lifestyle so I could be more suited for this. And I trusted that getting struck twice by lightning in 1 week is not going to happen to me. And then at 33 weeks, I went in for an ultrasound, and I called up and said, I need to come in. I just don't feel right. And the doctor, so we had the high-end special maternal fetal medicine doctor doing the ultrasound, and he's checking all the placenta and the blood flow, and he said, like, it all looks good here. And I was like, yeah, but is it like everything's okay? And he's like, it's fine. Like, it's all, the blood flow's going, blah, blah, blah. It's great. Go home. The next day, sure enough, I had very little movement. And I said to myself, well, I just got a scan the day before. He's fine. This is just how it is, just anxiety. And then I was sitting on the couch, and my partner was in the kitchen. We're making chicken burgers, and my dog was actually locked in the laundry. And I sat down on the couch, and it's like I felt, this is the way I describe it, and I have described it before, but it felt like there was this like energetic cord from like my room to, I don't know, the heavens, or, something big. And it was like gold, and I just felt it snap. And I turned to like my partner, and I was like, the baby just died. And he was like, whoa, chill out. Like, don't think like that. And I was like, I had no emotion. Like, I was like numb. I was like, oh no, the baby's dead. We're going to go to the hospital. We're going to have to do the birth again. Like, I was very, very mentally not well. And I knew when I went into the hospital, I was like quite mad, because at this point I was there like 2 days prior. And the specialist who did my ultrasound actually came and found me, and he had like tears in his eyes, and he was like, I'm so sorry. I don't know how we missed this. Your son has passed away again. And it was like I was beyond crying. Like, I didn't have that softness when I lost Luna. That was like it was like this soft grief, and then this was just like this hardening grief. This was like, not going to do it anymore. I'm done with life grief, if that makes sense. And once again, I had to birth. So our second child was a boy, and we called him Atlas. And we had to go through the birth. This time, sadly enough, I was more prepared for, yes, you can't give me that drug again. I actually got my acupuncturist in, and I was like, I want him to bring labour in, because again, I didn't have the risk because my baby had already passed. There were lots of like loopholes that you could do to bring in an acupuncturist to a hospital, which, it's sad that you're not allowed to do that in normal births, but at the same time, it was a blessing for me because he was able to bring it on within an hour, and I was full-blown labour. And I also was allowed all my girlfriends in the room, so I had 4 of my closest friends at the time to help me with it. There was this primal kind of way of his birth that I feel like came from his energy. Like, he did have this, like, I'm meant to be here, strong energy. And I really tapped into that. So in his birth, I kind of let it be that. And it's like, everyone fuck off kind of thing. I was like, I'm doing this my way, because it's not ideally what I want to be doing, but here I am, and I've been let down by the system twice now and not heard of. And then we only spent, because there's no complications after birth, I think I only spent like a day and a half with him, and at that point they had the cold cots. So that means that the baby's allowed to be in the room with you, and they're in like a little spaceship or a little bassinet kind of thing. So then it just keeps, you want to say it keeps them alive, but it's like the dark thing is, I guess, it keeps them a bit more preserved for a little bit longer as you're going through those really disorientating times of that early stages of grief. But we did opt for an autopsy, and once again, they said they can't find anything.
I'm really curious about what your experiences, how they differed between spending those 4 days with Luna and the 1.5 days with Atlas, how they differed, because obviously there's a huge physiological impact on being separated from your baby, and your milk still comes in, all of those things. I'm not sure if you took, I don't know if they recommended that medication to you that stops your milk from coming in, and what that was like for you in spending that time. Do you feel like it helped you a little bit more to process the grief with Luna versus Atlas and not having as much time, or was it a little bit easier with Atlas just because you'd already been through it and you knew what was coming for you?
Yeah, I guess there was, with Luna, I think spending time with her, it felt more sacred. Like it felt more like I don't like I just have to honor this time. And I kind of took the reason why my bladder wasn't working as this like, slow down, Bianca. It's like, let's not rush out of here. Let's soak this in. Um, with Atlas, it's like the emotion was just so different. It was just so like I was just so let down on so many levels, and it's like I did not see it coming. And I was manifesting and affirmations, and I was doing all the stuff that I felt not like myself. Like it was a very out of body experience with that back end of like I've been here before. Like they even put us in the same room by accident. So it was very traumatizing both times. But I think yeah, that's a hard question because I feel like either way it was um really tough. Yeah, so I lived in limbo land for a while. I kind of I took a lot of time off work, and I just did kind of side yoga stuff. And yeah, I guess I didn't really know who I was in that period because I was like so focused on getting my health in order to try again. And I did find a professor who specializes in the gene MTHFR. So once I did, because I did a lot of my own research as well, and the only thing I could find is that I do have that gene. So when I met with him, and he had done some studies where it showed that the placentas were a little bit abnormal for people who have that gene. So he's like, well, we probably should have you on blood thinners because it is a kind of a known blood clotting disorder. So we should have you on blood thinners regardless. So I think I was feeling a little bit empowered from both worlds going into my third pregnancy. I was like, okay, I want to know all the medical stuff, but then I'm going to put it back in my hands.
Yeah.
So nothing overrides my intuition, nothing. Like I was like, if we're going to do this again, it's everyone listen to me, and I'll decide whether or not with the information you're giving me is relevant for this right now. So, and I wasn't like rude or anything. I just searched for someone who would listen to my story. So at this point, I jumped on and started like doing like podcasts and talkings with Still Aware and some certain stillbirth kind of foundations. And that's when I got invited to a couple of talks where I met an obstetrician called Dr. She was just an obstetrician in Adelaide who was a part of that committee, knew my story. And I just said to her, I was like, look, I'm looking for an OB that when I say now's the time, you give me a cesarean. And she was like, all right, let's do it. Let's do it. So she was fantastic. Like we did also go through the IVF journey as well. It was more just this, I wanted a fast track the conception, and I wanted to get to where I was meant to be in 2016. So we did the IVF, but it just didn't work, and it's a very emotionally taxing
Mm.
journey on
And
so many levels.
so
Like
what year did you do the IVF in?
we did the IVF in, yeah. So, and yeah, we did 2 fail rounds. So they both didn't work. I think when I look back on the IVF journey, I was like consumed, like fully consumed with like trying to get pregnant, trying to get to where I need to, you know. I don't even know how I had that strength to keep going. Like a lot of like other mothers, they, if they've lost a child and then they look at me and they're like, wow, like how did you do that a third time? But there is something that's within you that always does know. And it's like, your spirit has chosen this exact trajectory and chosen all these experiences and you for that very reason. So there's a part of you that doesn't search for the answers, but rather just listens to them. And I think when I reflect back on it, is I was being pulled by that energy. So in the IVF experience, I think it was just very much an emotional heart body connection, and it wasn't working. So then I decided at that point, I'm going to study Chinese medicine. So that was in 2019. And by my first semester, I was 20 weeks pregnant
Well,
with our son now. So then we conceived a little boy. We had our obstetrician, who was just great. At 26 weeks, I was on bed rest, and so in the hospital. But it was like, I kind of bring both of those worlds. So I had the medical world. Yes, I was in the hospital when I was having obs and ultrasounds, but I came in with my yoga mat, with my diffuser, with my Lakshmi statue. I was like, I'm trying to bring it all in, and just I have room for all of this in my heart, kind of thing. So I was in there from 26 weeks. And then at 28 weeks and 2 days, I was getting weekly scans. And in the scan, I remember just feeling like something was a bit off. And previously in the past, when I've had these scans, I've said the same thing internally, but I've had to tell myself, oh, it's a first time pregnancy, or it's a pregnancy after loss. But it came up again. And I just remember being like really quiet and just trying to like work out why this is feeling off. And then there was a tiny little dip in the growth scan, like to the point that the ultrasound tech was like, ultrasounds are never fully like 20/20 vision. So would never go by that's an actual dip. We'll do a scan in a week and see. And then I remember stepping out with my OB, like she had always come to my appointments with me because she was in the hospital. And she was like, she just looked at me and she's like, how do you feel? And I was like, yeah, I don't feel right. And she was like, okay, I'll be back. And then I went back into my bed and I was like, just waiting. And then she came back a couple of hours later with a nurse with a steroid injection in hand. And she was like, okay, hear me out. We don't have anything to go by besides your something doesn't feel right. That is our only inkling that we have. And we know that if we wait to 30 weeks or 28 weeks and 2 days to do this, that the survival rate is about the same. There's nothing different. And then she said she went to the other doctors I've had before and said, look, she's just had this growth scan. They didn't say who I was. They just said, I've got this client who's had this growth scan dip. What would you recommend? And they all said, they were male doctors, and they all said, just wait a week. Just wait a week. So then she's like, look, I'm going to do the opposite of what they did. I'm going to go by like something doesn't feel right, and we're going to do this now. And at that point, I remember being like, that is the right decision. As much as no one wants to have a baby at 28 weeks, like that's his own journey, but I was like, let's do it. So I got the steroid, and then they give you this like hectic like drip. There's this like mag sulfate or something. It's very, very intense, and it feels like lead goes throughout your whole body. And in that time, I actually started, because you were hooked up to the monitor like the whole time, so overnight, as they like prepped for cesarean first thing in the morning. And I remember them saying they'll try to push the cesarean back later on in the arvo. But overnight, I was actually like the heartbeat was going down, and it was having these quite little what they call bradycardias. So the heart rate was going down, and they were like, something's going on a 24/7 basis that we can't see from a quick 5-minute ultrasound. Even if we're doing 2 back-to-back ultrasounds, like there's something happening. So then they decided, let's do it right now. So I was first in to surgery, and so my son was born via a C-section. I remember being in the room, and I was petrified. I had never birthed a baby and heard it cry. So I, I was told that sometimes 28 weekers don't. And I had 2 women surgeons, one who was quite fancy with her tools. She did a lot of high risk stuff. And then I had my obstetrician. And between the 2 of them, they were able to bring out him in the water sack. So
Wow.
he was like born, yeah, like, so they were able to like take him out like that and hold him. And then they just gave him a little nick, and the water went everywhere, and he cried. And I just, I can't even, like, that feeling was just, I don't even know where I was. It was like this huge relief. Like I was that little burst of water in his little sack, and it's like when he breathed, I finally breathed for the first time since 2016. So we then went through our journey. We spent 97 days in the NICU. As far as Premi World goes, we were quite fortunate. We had a private pediatric surgeon who I like handpicked. You know, a lot of women who have premature labor, they don't have this choice to like be like, oh, I want this doctor or I want that. You know, it's just, oh no, emergency. So like we were quite fortunate in those sense. And then we brought home 97 days later, we brought home our little boy Sage, who's now about to turn 5.
Oh, wow.
So we got there. Yeah,
Oh, wow. Yeah.
big journey.
I I guess the first place I'll start is what your stay in the NICU was like. If you experienced any fear of loss while you were there, like was everything pretty smooth, or was there? I'm sure that there was anxiety involved also within that journey, regardless of the amazing doctors. And yeah, just I'm like so impressed with your OB, your female OB that you ended up with, that she really listened to you. And I think we're seeing so much that doctors just aren't listening to women in that space, and we're receiving so much birth trauma in hospitals. So the fact that she was like, we're going to do this and I'm listening to you is so huge in that part of your healing and trusting again.
I was just going to say, like, on that note of like listening, you know, once I was able to reflect back on Luna and Atlas's journey, what was missing was them handing me back my power.
Mm.
Because you can go study to be a midwife, you can go study to be a gynae, an obstetrician, you know, a high risk maternal fetal medicine doctor. But yes, you have the qualifications, but the woman is like their intuition is like tenfold. It's way more than what's going on the paper. And everyone's so unique and different. So when I look back on those situations, you know, the first pregnancy, my normal midwife never told me to come in for a scan. They never gave me that power. The second doctor was like, oh, everything looks all good here. But they never then turned around and said, but how do you feel? Or what do you need? Would you like another scan tomorrow? Do you want to go get a coffee and come back an hour later? Do you want to come in and get a scan? do you want me to call you in about an hour and see if the movement's picked up? Like, there was never this handing back the power to the mother. And what happens in like those moments of grief, if you know, God forbid, you do lose your child, is like you've also just lost a lot of your trust in the world. And it's something that the Western medicine kind of format sets up anyway. It's like this: you go to a doctor and they tell you what pill to take, you know, and you go when you've finally had like enough of migraines, but you weren't able to listen to that first little moment when you were overworking, you know, and you did a 6 months work stint, and then we go somewhere else and we hand over our power. So I think having that obstetrician that was able to be like, keep giving it back to me, and not only give it back to me, but be like, I'm listening to you. I'm listening fully to you, because this is what can happen. And you know more than me what's going on in your body.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're seeing too much of this as well. And I was talking to a friend earlier about this, that, you know, it can kind of both go hand in hand with one another. You know, you've got these people that aren't handing the power back to you. And then in some instances, like, we almost trust in these professionals and the advice of these people so much that if we raise our voice, you know, I was saying it's like when you get a bad haircut or something, you know, like you're sitting there watching it unfold and internally you're screaming, going like, I feel right about this, but it's too late to say anything by the time you do. So even when you're saying something, you're like, oh, I'm not sure. They're kind of like, oh, you know, it's fine. But that reassurance, and then that part of yourself that's going like, it's not really fine, but they're telling me it is, like, that's a really challenging part to navigate and face with the professionals. So I'll go back to your the NICU stay, and what was that like as you were caring?
So we had this great pediatrician who we were one of his last clients before he retired, and he, funny enough, actually birthed my brother, which was just so my brother's 6 years younger than me, which was just so random, but I just really liked him. So as we went through the journey, like I said, it was pretty smooth sailing. Like, we had to deliver early because we didn't know why, and I just had to go by a feeling. But there wasn't an abnormality. There wasn't something that needed care to. He still got all the horrendous, like, brain scans and heart scans and eye scans, and he did all of that sort of stuff. And, you know, he had really bad reflux, so he would have a lot of bradycardias. But when I first went in, until 35 weeks of him, you know, his gestation, so he was born at 28 weeks, it wasn't till 35 weeks that I actually started to soften, because I was like, we didn't have an answer for losing Luna and Atlas. So what's to say it won't happen when they're alive? Like, why won't it happen now? You know, why? So I was just, I would, you know, I was in hospital for 5 days, and I was pretty much at his bed 24/7, unless a nurse was like, you need to go down and take meds, or you need to eat something. I was clung to him.
Yeah.
And when we had to go home, because obviously you have to go home every night, I was just distraught. I
Yeah.
would come home and I would like violently clean the whole house. I was pumping every 2 hours. I don't think anyone really tells you how to pump and how to do all of that stuff, you know. I didn't have the normal pregnancy, and I obviously wasn't planning ahead of time. You know, I wasn't like, okay, I need this pump and I need to be able to learn about breast milk and stuff, because I was just going day by day at that point with his pregnancy. I was like, he just needs to be alive, and then it will all come together. So the fear and anxiety was like hectic, so hectic. When you're in the NICU, you've got one nurse to one baby, and it's more the intensive care unit. So it's pretty shitty place to be in, because generally the babies that are in there are very not well,
Yeah.
and the beepers are going off. So I became very like hyper vigilant and alert to those beepers. And, you know, even though he was there and I was able to like stare at his stats and, you know, I was able to have a little hold with him, I think like 4 days after he was born, which was pretty lucky. Um, it was still quite a tormenting time. Then you go to NICU 2, which is like similar layout, but it's like 2 nurses to or 3 nurses to the baby. So
Wow.
it's a little bit more chilled, but then I feel like at that point I was like spiraling, like really, really bad. Like I wasn't sleeping. It actually, so Sage was born in 2020 and it was our first COVID hit. So 2 weeks into his birth, it was lockdown.
Wow.
Um, and everyone was freaking out, as you can remember. Um, I was weirdly enough, I was like not that freaked out because I think I was worried people would come in and then like touch him or like then bring their sickness. And
Mm.
then COVID hit and then they couldn't come in anyway. And I was like,
Yeah.
well, it's less sickness in hospital. One less thing to worry about. But it became a very isolating journey for me because my partner wasn't allowed to be in there. It was only one person in the
Right.
NICU at a time.
Yeah.
So it was, I had to deal with all those little, like the bradycardias and the beeping and the reflux and all of that almost solo. Like my partner came in at night, but that was like horrible for him as well. Like he's just so great at always being positive. Um, I'm more of a factual person, being like not positive until we've got enough money in the bank for it to feel like it's a positive thing.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it was quite, and to be honest, I started to see the effects of my NICU stay, and also just the trauma of loss come out probably about 2 years ago. And I felt like I was mentally not well. And it was strange because it's like I felt like everything's going good. Um, and my body's recovering and my son's doing good and career-wise it's great, but I was having these like blackout panic attacks. So I wouldn't know I was having a panic attack and then I'd black out. So it was like what happens to your body in those traumatic times is like pretty much the equivalent of going to war, you know, and being in a horrific scene. It's just you don't realize its effects until like years down the track. And you know, I teach yoga and a Chinese medicine doctor, so you know, I've got great tools in my toolbox, but this world was definitely something else.
Yeah, you put that really well, like going to war, because it does it the things that you watch and the things that your mind has to wrap around are quite violent in a lot of ways, where you're like, this shouldn't be happening. This isn't what I expected of my life. So yeah, I'm really hearing you on that and feeling that as well, because it is like going,
Mm.
or you're battling with all these conversations and emotions and hormones that aren't actually operating in a symbiotic relationship through like a very vulnerable time.
Mm.
Um, oh yeah, I'm wondering what your journey in motherhood is like now after loss. Do you feel like that anxiety is still there and present with you now that Sage is about to turn 5, or is it softened even further?
Yeah, if I'm honest, I feel like it's only softened in the past year.
Mm.
So I feel like I I never really softened to the thought that he could just die. And you know, I'll still have lapsing moments where the other day we were at the beach with my friends and Sage was with my parents, and my parents wanted to drop him off early. And my stepmom's shocking with text messages. She's just not tech savvy. And her message was something like, it was just, "Are you home?" And instead of the logical thing being like, "Oh, I'm not home, I'm at the beach, I'll be home in 15 minutes or something," I went, "Holy fuck, he's died." And they want to come over and they want to tell me about how he's died and they're so sorry.
Oh,
And my friends were like, whoa. Like, I was able to voice that. Back in the day, I would always internalize it and it would just brew like a sickness. Whereas I was able to voice that and they were like, whoa, okay, let's call them. And, you know, I call my dad and he's like, Sage is right next to me. We just want to go out. Can we drop him off a bit earlier kind of thing? You know, it's like the logical thing was actually that. But there's still these fleeting moments where that fear does seep in. And I haven't fully mastered how to not feel like that, because I guess when you experience this type of grief, it it was birthed from love, like the most profound love you can ever imagine. And when you are unable to give that love to your child, and then you have a child that you're able to give it to, the grief then comes back with it. And it's like two sides of a coin, you know, it's just not able to be separated. So it did take me a long time to feel safe. We had a rough breastfeeding journey. Like, unfortunately, I I would get a lot of fear when feeding him because I had a really strong letdown, and then he didn't have a very good reflex because he was preemie, and I would worry. My thought was, oh my God, his heart's going to stop while he breastfeeds. And he is such a little, babies are so energetically aligned. They pick up on so much. And he was just like, oh, I'm not a titty guy then. I am not into these things. And, you know, yeah, he's not into them. So I think, yeah, there is lots of stuff that's been robbed from the initial Luna's pregnancy naive birth experience that I wanted. But there's also a lot of like acceptance that's come from that. And, you know, now I work a lot with women's health. And it's like, it feels very complete for me. It feels like this is the work I'm meant to be doing because I can hold that space.
yeah.
I felt it. You know, it's like, it's not like a psych or a counselor, and you know, you talk to them about your grief and they know the tools of how grief works. Is like, actually, no, they've felt this unique loss.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I'd love to touch more on that in a moment, but you were speaking about what happened with your dad, and I'm curious what your support system was like in the immediacy after your losses, and what it was like for people showing up for you and how you were navigating that, and I guess all of the many challenges that come with people just not understanding the enormity of this kind of grief.
Uh, yeah, and that is something that probably needs to be spoken about more. I felt like in my first pregnancy, like I was pretty young, I was 26, so I think I was the first, or at least the second out of like a big group of girlfriends that was pregnant. And when we lost her, you know, I was teaching yoga full time, so I had a really beautiful student community, and there was a lot of outpour of love, like a lot. Like, I felt very supported in that period, even though I didn't understand any of it, but it was like I felt held. When we lost Atlas, it was the opposite. It was like I became something that's incomprehensible. Like, like I felt like I no longer was understood by the world, and I was viewed as like, whoa, like I would have friends get pregnant and never talk to me.
Yeah.
Like I was like bad voodoo or something. And I got it. Like I was like, I get it. You know, I had friends be like, oh, but what happened to you? That's just something was wrong though. Like, and I was so isolated. I was in the shittest club. So it was really, really difficult to navigate my grief in my second loss, because I just didn't have a strong support system. My partner went back to work really quickly, which also caused like so much tension between us because I felt like I had to do it all on my own. So it was two also very different support ways. I feel like a lot of people don't know how to handle loss. And the people that really struggle with that a lot as well is, I feel like, sometimes mothers. who have had their child, because they know that love feeling and they know that you feel that. But it's like, it's so hard for mothers to like separate your experience to my experience, because it's just like we have this connection already that we both birth.
Yeah.
So I felt very, very hard to talk to other women in that realm, because I felt like I would be judged, or and they wouldn't know how to look at me, as in like it could happen to them. But it was like, oh no, it would never happen to me. And I'd been there.
Yeah, I had many friends that were all pregnant with me at the same time, and then I suddenly lost my baby after birth, and a couple of them continued to talk to me, but one of them stopped talking to me, like as if my loss would rub off on her like a disease or something. And that was so heartbreaking and so
Horrible.
isolating, because I was like, whoa, we were on this journey together, and I know I'm not on this journey now with any of you guys, because all your babies survived, and I will never understand in this moment what it's like to breastfeed and to, you know, be up at night and to learn whatever it is with Dash. But yeah, to segregate lost mothers away from their community in that way that's something that's been like really shocking to me, actually.
Yeah. And, you know, like, I don't know if you've heard of, like, some people were for it, but like the infant, like bereaved Mother's Day, like bereaved lost Mother's Day. So it's like, I think it's like October the 15th or something. And it's like a Mother's Day for just bereaved mothers.
Mm.
And there's something about that that infuriates me.
Yeah.
And I'm like, why? I'm still a mother. Like, but like, I want to mourn on Mother's Day for sure, but I also want to be recognized for carrying life.
Yeah.
For like I still have that love. So I often kind of get like weirdly triggered around those days, because it does, is such an isolating time, and your experience does not rub off on someone. And I know that feeling so well. Like I've been through so many, you know, kind of side friendships that have kind of treated me that way. And they may not have said the exact words, but it's like your actions, you know, they speak pretty loud. Like,
Yeah,
I'm
it's
not
a
in
subtle
your club.
thing where you're just like, oh, okay, I see that this isn't okay for you anymore. And yeah, I recognize how hard that is. I felt that naivety too a lot within our experience.
Mm,
How naive was it of me to think I would this, like, I'm aware that this can happen, but it's never going to happen to me. And how unprepared you are. But
mm,
yeah, when the community and the support distances, you're just like, wait, I'm going through this. You're not going, you can just tap out of this whenever, but I actually need the support. So please don't step away. And they do, because it's a lot to confront.
mm.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, it is.
So the work that you're doing at the moment, do you tend to work with a lot of mothers that have experienced loss, or what kind of work are you doing within this space?
Yeah, so within Sage's, like, you know, he's 5 now. So for 6 years I've been studying Chinese medicine,
Mm.
to be an acupuncturist and Chinese medicine practitioner. And I've still continued to teach yoga. The yoga I teach is more like a yin base, mix of qigong, a bit more gentle, which is kind of, you know, where I'd like to, like, this is the realm I like to teach in, is that kind of do less to receive more kind of space. And so I feel like now, you know, moving into this clinical practice, you know, I've had some like IVF clients, which has been, you know, really beautiful, because it's like I'm able to hold that space that's like, oh yeah, I've seen that.
Mm.
I know how difficult this can be, and which is beautiful. You know, I felt that as well. I've treated like a few of my friends that have been pregnant, and there's still a part of me that's like, like I have to kind of check myself being like their experience is different to mine. And there's a part of me that's like, it's crazy how many people just have babies and it's fine.
Yeah.
Like that to me is just like, wow. So I think like as I move more into like practice, I love to kind of hold space for women who have experienced loss, or even just postpartum in general. Like I think postpartum, it can be quite like for a lot of women who don't have that great free home birth kind of experience, there's quite a lot of trauma around birth as it is, like whether you had a cesarean or they used the forceps, or the baby wasn't breathing for a few minutes, and in a Chinese medicine perspective, that does a lot to the mother's blood, which is the nourishment for yourself. So like I really want to move more into that space of holding that, and I do run women's workshops on women's health, so just the Eastern perspective on the phases of life for a woman. So from receiving your cycle to pregnancy, tap a little bit into loss, and then all the way through to menopause.
Yeah. Wow. You've reminded me of something, and yeah, what was your experience after Luna and Atlas in getting your cycle back? Because I know for me, mine came back right on the dot of 6 weeks. Like, did you find that you were in a good sync again, or how was that for you? Was it traumatizing to receive your cycle back?
So with Luna, it was same as you, like it was spot on, like 6 weeks, and it was actually horrendous. Like it felt like labor. Again, it was really brutal. And then the same thing happened with Atlas, but it wasn't as bad. I think for me, I was able to soften around like my cycle a lot more after loss, because I imagine Luna like the moon, and I imagine my body and my cycles and my womb being a reflection of the moon. So every time I get my period, it's like this it's almost like her energy. It's like something that I get to find reverence in. So as much as I'll look forward to menopause, but it's beautiful to have, your cycle in a sense, because it is their house. And something that also, like on the topic of like things that help, is like your DNA will forever now be like mixed with theirs, like in your body. I don't know the full ins and outs, but just like knowing that like you're forever changed and they're forever you in a sense is,
Yeah.
there's something to hold.
I have heard, I've had many people send me articles about this, and yeah, something that has brought me a lot of solace as well. But yeah, recently I understood it that the DNA from all your children actually gets passed into the next children. So that means Sage would also be carrying parts of Luna and Atlas with him, which is also really incredible and beautiful that, yeah, he's always connected to his siblings too.
Yeah, we try to talk to him about it as well.
Yeah.
He's still a bit young now, but we're pretty open. Like, yeah, we've had 2 children. Like, there's times where it's hard, and like you'll be in a setting, or like you're at a cafe and a old lady is like, oh, what a beautiful little boy, and just the one. And my response is, yeah, just the one. And it's not me, like I used to have a lot of guilt about that, but it's more now just this, like I can't keep holding space for other people, in like I need to hold that space for me, because like sometimes they can't, and I'm sure you've probably already experienced this, like sometimes people do not say the right things, and it keeps you up at night. It's like you've been seen in this light that just is nowhere near how you perceive yourself.
Yeah. I remember being 3 months postpartum, having not been active and not having a baby to pick up and not breastfeeding. So my belly was still and I'm also 3 months postpartum, so let's be realistic, like your belly is still going to be sticking out. And I had someone ask me if I was pregnant, and I was like, it was a very messy conversation, but I was basically like, no. And she goes, oh, I'm so sorry. And I think for a second she thought, oh shit, like this lady's just fat. And I was like,
Oh,
I'm postpartum. And she goes, oh, congratulations. And then I was like, he died. And she was like,
oh,
oh, and I was like, I don't know what's going on. So yeah, there's a lot of
I know.
conversations like that where people don't realize what they're saying is not directed well, and they're not thinking about what they're saying. There's excitement behind it or whatever, but you just don't know who you're talking to and what their experiences are. And it's really hard. Like, that was my first interaction with a stranger after losing my son. And I was like, I need to rehearse this a little bit better before I go out into the public domain.
Yeah, it's another thing. Yeah, another thing you don't. And some days you've got like your energy feels a little bit more stronger, so you're able to be like, yeah, what happened to me was awful.
Yeah.
Like, and they say, I'm so sorry, and you go, thank you. It's awful.
Yeah.
But then other days it's like you just don't even have the capacity to, like, in those fleeting moments, it's like even explain it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I got a lot of like, oh my God, your body's bounced back so
Oh,
quickly after birth. And it's like, what?
yeah.
Like, ew.
Yeah.
I remember once I had a student who was like, I just got back into teaching. It was like one of my first classes after losing Luna. And she was like, oh, how's your baby? You're back. And I was like, oh, I'm sorry, my baby passed away. And she was like, oh, my dog passed away last
Oh.
month. And I was like, I'm so sorry for your loss. I was like, whoa, I don't have the capacity to hold that space for people. So, like, I think if I can share it in a way that's empowering,
Mm.
um, and allows others to soften, then I'm all for it. But other than that, I keep a lot of my story now, I guess, to myself.
Yeah, for sure. What would be some of your advice then to people who are, approaching someone who's experienced loss? Like, what are some of the things that you found most helpful that people said to you?
So one quote, I don't even know who said it, where it came from, but it was only the gentle are ever truly strong.
Mm.
And I think there's, especially in like, Western culture, there's this kind of, even if you do have your baby and it's all good, it's like, come on, mama, when are you going back to work, or when are you getting back to your fitness? Or, there's still that mentality in the Western culture. And when you're grieving and, your body is also not what it was meant to be, it's just so important to go even softer than you could.
Mm.
There's you're gonna feel this for the rest of your life. At one point in your life, it's almost going to feel like this. Like I still can't make sense of it. Some days it's like, wow, how did that happen to me? Like, who am I from that? And I think the only answer to all of that is just go gentle, go softly. Like,
Mm.
grief tends to have these like sharp edges. And the antidote is to file down those edges a little bit. So they're less sticky with the pointy bits. I think conserving a lot of your energy as well is important. Um, it's so healthy to talk about it, and it's like very vulnerable. But you probably notice this now as well. Like, when you kind of relive it and you talk about it, the more you talk about your story, you become more detached, like it is a story. And
Mm.
then and that will present itself of like you potentially not crying.
Yeah.
And like, the first few times you told your story and you cry, and then all of a sudden you're not crying. So, and this is my knowledge now as a Chinese medicine doctor, it's like your body still knows that sadness. And when you're actually telling that story and you're not having that release with your tears, you're not able to physically shed that pain, it does kind of bottle up a little bit. So this idea of like conserving your energy and making sure you're feeling the feels, like your body will tell you when it's like, whoa, I'm so exhausted from, this kind of life and this grief. And it's so important to listen to that and just like do less,
Yeah.
go gentle.
What?
There was something else I was going to say that was really helpful. It's gone. I'll come back.
What? I guess both as through your experience and also as a Chinese medicine doctor, like what would be some of the things that you would recommend to any mother that's going through this, like both in the immediate and, in the years to come? What were some of the things that helped you get through?
I really love sentimental things. So I think I got some artwork done. I did like their ultrasounds and then went to a frame shop and got them done like really beautifully, and they're up in my bedroom. I think it's more about like, and whatever sort of like way you want to honor your grief, like, sometimes it's like I'm going to go for a walk and I want to see them and feel them in the air or in the space. So, or it's like I want to go invest in a new bedspread and like lighten up the room. Can there be an element to that of there's this ritual that's coming from this love? So, that moment I'm going for a walk and it's out of love and it's out of like ritual. So there's just this like this deeper meaning to your actions. So you're really able to like feel into it. On the Chinese medicine lens, it is like, so you've got your 40 days after giving birth that we recommend you like stay and rest, like you pretty much don't walk.
Yeah.
And, I would argue that if you then have lost a baby, it's 80 days. It's like 80 days in bed, like there has to be 10 times more nourishment, more support in so many ways. The Indigenous culture, like First Nations people, when a woman loses a baby, the healer, so they have specific healers that are able to work with the physical realm, but they're also able to like kind of cross over and I don't know if you've heard many stories, but they're able to kind of cross over and speak with a more spiritual realm. So when a mother loses their baby, they actually bring the spirit of the baby back into the mother's body for a period of time. So, yeah, so during the grief, she can, like, it can be softened even more. So if we, take these, and I love that. I love that concept. Like it's acknowledging the loss, it's acknowledging the pain, and it's actually having a place for it. It's having this place to be like, yeah, you are grieving, and we're gonna, as a community, we're gonna witness that and hold space for it. So if we were to flip it on like I guess a Western perspective, that is allowing others to be acknowledging your loss and also acknowledging your baby. Like I loved it when people were like, did you know what color eyes Luna had? Or do you think, I've got a beautiful girlfriend who, she's never had kids, but she's definitely wants to be a mum, and she's like full hippy dippy, and I love her to bits. But we became like besties because she was able to sit with me one night and we're eating takeout after a couple of champagnes, and she was able to sit with me and just ask me questions about like, do you think Luna would have looked more like Sage or Atlas? Or do you ever think like other mothers could do this? They ask the questions that I think a lot of people tiptoe around because they're like, I don't want to upset you. But it's like those healers of those Indigenous cultures, it's like, no, we are aware that that spirit is now leaving that body. So let's just hold some space to talk about it in a very normal way. So the mother can still be reminded of the love that comes first and foremost from this grief, right?
Yeah. I actually had a friend when I went to Bali who grew up in Bali, and they just have such a different lens with their understanding and processing of death and grief. And she asked similar questions to me about Dash. And it was so wonderful to actually be asked those questions and be able to have those conversations. And the thing that made me feel so good about the conversation was at the end when she said, "Thank you so much for sharing. I really feel like I got to know him." And I was like,
Yes.
yeah, because
Yeah.
that's my son and I want to be able to talk about him, and I want to be able to share like also the really cute little things that come through as messages where I'm like, oh, like I'm imagining that Dash is quite a cheeky boy and like he's like this and he's like that. And she's like, wow, you're really painting a picture for me of what his energy was like. And I'm sorry I didn't get to meet him, but I really feel like I'm getting to know him. And that means a
Oh,
lot.
that's so beautiful.
Yeah.
That's so exactly how the support should be as well. It's like they see your loss
Mm.
and they're like, let me do this for you or whatever, the support on the physical, but just getting to know your child because you as a mother were like so on board of their energy
Yeah.
and you're so in tune to it. And I think sometimes society kind of pulls you away from it a little bit, but when you actually reflect, you're like, oh my God, I really know that kid,
Yeah.
like in and out.
Yeah.
Like even if it wasn't for a long period of time, and that love that you gave them wasn't like, you keep doing acts of love for all of that, but they were able to feel how much love you held for them as well. So it is really special when people and friends are able to recognize their lives as like, these little humans that were definitely gone too soon.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. Well,
Mm.
thank you so much, love. Is there anything else that you feel like you wanted to touch on or that we might have missed?
I don't think so. Like, I think just like thank you for like sharing this space. Like, I follow you on Instagram, and I just follow you because you just look like gorgeous goddess. So I was following your pregnancy journey and just being like, oh, what a babe. And when I saw your loss, it was I really was feeling it. And I know that every situation is different when
Mm.
you lose a child. And I can't even imagine that whirlwind of stress in those moments before he passed that you must still be digesting on some level.
Sure.
So I think what you're doing here and how you're sharing it is paving the way for a lot of other women to heal. So it's really beautiful. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It's a big journey.
Mm.
And what I'm realizing more than anything, especially with talking to other mums who've experienced loss, is like this cannot and should not be done alone. And that immediate feeling of feeling alone in our loss is something I'd never want anyone else to feel. And yeah, even if it's just connecting mums that can come and listen to the podcast and know things that can help them get through and that their stories can be heard just as much as all of those positive ones. I think that's really important. Like these stories need that platform as well. And I just wasn't seeing it anywhere out there. So thanks for
No.
coming on and trusting me with your story.
Mm. Yeah, thank you. It's nice to, I feel like I haven't spoken about them in so long because life's been, as it just all of a sudden life just keeps going on and it gets busy and, your past becomes less of what's taking place now.
Yeah.
And today, before I spoke with you, I just went and sat in the sun and I was going to listen to like a podcast or something, but I just put my phone down and I was like, oh, I'm going to listen to the trees. And this beautiful butterfly flew past me. And I just had this moment of like, oh, yeah, you're still there. I
Yeah.
still feel you. Like it just felt, it was nice. It was nice to like soften into that grief again in a odd way.
Yeah. Well, thank you, love. And where can people connect with you?
Yeah, so I've got a website. It's called baskwellness.com.au. I share some inspo there and also my workshops, classes, and consults for acupuncture. And then I'm on Instagram, so that's Basque Wellness, as well as my Instagram handle, just Bianca Zara. So I share a lot of my grief journey on my Instagram handle, so my Bianca Zara one, and then more Chinese medicine based stuff on Basque. Thank you.
Thank you so much, love.
Yeah, and you too. Just yeah, keep sharing how this grief feels and keep feeling it as well for him.